The morning air was cold, but not cold enough to explain the silence in the car. It was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, the kind that makes even breathing feel heavy. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the back seat, a golden retriever named Max sat quietly, his tail occasionally thumping against the worn fabric, unaware that his world was about to change forever. Daniel hadn't always been this distant. There was a time when Max was the center of his life. Long walks in the park, late, night snacks shared on the couch, and endless games of fetch that left both of them exhausted but happy. Max had been there through everything, through Daniel's worst days and his best ones, especially after the accident. 3 months ago, everything fell apart. Daniel lost his job, bills piled up, calls went unanswered. The house that once felt warm and safe began to feel like a cage. And as much as it broke him to admit it, Max became a reminder of a life he could no longer hold together. Car slowed as Daniel turned onto a quiet road near the edge of town. Trees lined both sides, their branches swaying gently in the wind. It was peaceful, too peaceful. He pulled over. For a moment he just sat there. His hands trembled slightly as he looked into the rear-view mirror. Max's eyes met his instantly, bright, trusting, loyal, completely unaware. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. He stepped out of the car, walked around, and opened the back door. Max jumped out happily, his tail wagging, thinking this was just another stop on another adventure. Daniel couldn't look at him for long. He unclipped Max's leash and took a few steps back. Max tilted his head, confused but still wagging. Waiting for the next command, waiting for the next moment they would share, but it never came. Daniel turned around, got back into the car, and drove away. At first, Max didn't move. He stood there, watching the car disappear down the road, his tail slowly slowing, then stopping altogether. A soft whimper escaped him as realization began to creep in. But Max didn't run, he stayed. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then began its slow descent. Cars occasionally passed by, but Max didn't chase them. He didn't wander. He simply sat near the spot where Daniel had left him, his eyes fixed on the road, waiting. Night fell, the temperature dropped, and the wind grew colder. Max curled up near a tree, his body trembling slightly. But every few minutes he would lift his head, ears perked, hoping to hear the familiar sound of Daniel's car. It never came. Day 1 turned into day 2. By the 3rd day, Max was weak. He hadn't eaten, he barely moved. But he still waited. A woman named Sarah drove down that road every morning on her way to work. On the first day, she noticed the dog, but assumed he belonged to someone nearby. On the second day, she slowed down, a feeling of unease settling in her chest, but it was the 3rd day that made her stop. Max was still there. This time, he didn't even stand up as her car approached. Sarah pulled over quickly and stepped out. "Hey there," she called softly, her voice filled with concern. Max lifted his head slowly. His eyes were tired, but when he saw her, his tail gave a weak wag. Not because he recognized her, but because somewhere deep inside, he still believed that every human could be kind. Sarah's heart broke instantly. She approached slowly, kneeling down a few feet away. "Where's your owner?" she whispered, though she already feared the answer. Max tried to stand but stumbled slightly. Sarah moved closer, gently placing a hand on his head. His fur was dirty, his body thin, but his eyes still held hope. "I'm not leaving you here," she said firmly. She carefully lifted Max into her car and drove straight to the nearest vet. As Max lay on the examination table, barely conscious, the vet shook his head. "He's dehydrated and starving. If you hadn't brought him in today..." He didn't finish the sentence. Sarah stayed. Hours passed as fluids were administered, as food was slowly introduced, as warmth returned to Max's body. And slowly, incredibly, Max began to recover. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at the empty space where Max's bed used to be. The silence was unbearable now, no tail wagging, no soft footsteps, no presence that had once filled the room with unconditional love. He thought it would make things easier. It didn't. It made everything worse. Days turned into restless nights. Guilt gnawed at him constantly. Every sound reminded him of Max. Every quiet moment became louder than any noise. He tried to distract himself. It didn't work. Finally, after a week of torment, Daniel broke. He grabbed his keys and drove back to that road. His heart pounded as he approached the spot, the same trees, the same empty stretch of land, but Max wasn't there. Panic surged through him. He jumped out of the car, calling out desperately, "Max, Max," only silence answered. Daniel dropped to his knees, his chest tightening as the reality hit him. He had lost the one being who had never given up on him. Tears streamed down his face as regret consumed him completely. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, though there was no one left to hear it. Just then, a car pulled up behind him. It was Sarah. She had returned to the spot out of curiosity, hoping to understand how a dog could have been left there for so long. She stepped out, noticing Daniel immediately. "Are you looking for the dog?" she asked cautiously. Daniel turned quickly, hope flickering in his eyes. "You've seen him." Sarah studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "I found him 3 days after he was left here. He was barely alive." Daniel's face fell, but hope still lingered. Is he okay?" Sarah crossed her arms slightly, her expression firm. "He's alive, but he suffered a lot." Daniel looked down, shame flooding his face. "I made a mistake," he said quietly, "the biggest mistake of my life." Sarah's gaze softened just a little. "That dog waited for you for 3 days. He never left this spot." Those words hit harder than anything else. Daniel couldn't hold back anymore. "Please, can I see him?" There was a long pause. Finally, Sarah nodded. They drove in silence to her home. As soon as they stepped inside, Max lifted his head from a soft blanket near the window. He looked healthier now, stronger, but the moment his eyes landed on Daniel, something incredible happened. His tail started wagging, slowly at first, then faster. Daniel froze, tears already forming. Max stood up and, despite everything, ran toward him. No hesitation, no anger, no resentment, just pure, unconditional love. Daniel dropped to his knees as Max reached him, wrapping his arms around him tightly. "I'm so sorry," he repeated over and over again. Max simply licked his face, as if to say none of it mattered. Sarah watched from a distance, her eyes filled with emotion, because in that moment, something unbelievable had happened. The dog that had every reason to give up chose love instead, and the man who had made the worst decision of his life was given a second chance. But this time Daniel knew one thing for sure: he would never let Max go again.